Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is leadership and how important it is for leadership to lead. That is, of course, where the word leadership comes from. My concern is that it appears that our leadership in Washington is not acting. National Democratic leadership, read Nancy Pelosi, once again failed to stem anti-Semitism by inviting a rabid anti-Semite to give an invocation in the House on May 9th. The words spoken in Congress on that day by Imam Omar Suleiman of Texas were appropriate. He said, "We pray for peace, not war, love, not hate, benevolence, not greed, unity, not division. And we commit ourselves to not betraying our prayers with actions that contradict them." The issue is not what Suleiman said that day in Congress. The issue is what the Imam from Texas has said, posted, tweeted, written, and said in the past. That is where the specter of anti-Semitism emerges. His thoughts and leanings are so readily available to anyone with a computer. They could read them, everyone, that makes it glaringly clear that the affront of the Democratic leadership was so much more offensive and inexcusable. Once again, the ball was in their court, and they proceeded to drop the ball. Instead of inviting a presence considered to be a unifying force, they invited a clergy member with a history of calling for violence against Israel. Some might say that it's okay for Suleiman to express anti-Israel sentiment. After all, while born in New Orleans, Louisiana, the Imam is the son of Palestinian parents. But it's not okay. No one, not an imam, not a store clerk, not a medical technician, not a politician, no one at all can pick and choose which violence is good and which is bad. And no one can say that it's okay to murder, not to murder Jews or Israelis or anyone. To offer a public and visible respected forum, all of which defines the invocation before Congress of the United States, to someone who preaches hate is simply to apply a double standard. It is the essence of the double standard argument, that Israel and Jews are different. Omar Suleiman is an anti-Semite, and an invitation to give the invocation, the blessing before the Congress of the United States of America is, in return, to give a blessing to his message, to all of his messages. These are some of the Imam Suleiman's ideas. You decide for yourself. In 2014, Suleiman urged Palestinians to take to the streets and participate in another intifada. An intifada, by the way, is not a peaceful protest rally. An intifada is a violent, armed uprising. In a Facebook post, Suleiman wrote, "How befitting that the third intifada starts on the 27th night of Ramadan, as worshippers are denied prayer in the Masjid al-Aqsa," which is the Mosque of Al-Aqsa in Jerusalem. The march throughout Palestine is growing, and all of the families in East Jerusalem are in the streets. He ended his entry by writing, "God willing, on this blessed night, as the third intifada begins, the beginning of the end of Zionism is here. May Allah help us overcome this monster, protect the innocent of the world, and accept the murdered as martyrs. Amen." That is not an isolated example. In fact, it is a tame example of the ways in which Suleiman has attacked Israel. He has called Zionists enemies of God, his messengers sincere followers of all religions and humanity as a whole. And in 2015, he compared Israelis to Nazis when he said, "Want to know what it's like to live under Nazis? Look no further than the Palestinians are treated daily by apartheid Israel. Sickening." Imam Omar Suleiman has also upset some of the most radical Muslims in the world. ISIS, yes, ISIS, has called for his assassination. That decree came about as a result of a film Suleiman made with Pastor Andrew Stoker of the First United Methodist Church in Dallas. The film is titled "An Imam, a Pastor, and a Dream." And in the movie, the Imam said he believed that groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda have hijacked his religion. He's done good deeds, there's no question about it. He spoke at the funeral of the murdered police officers in Dallas. But that neither erases nor nullifies what he says and writes about Israel and about Jews. He was at that shootout, by the way. And while it seems clear that Suleiman has some very positive views of unity, those ideas do not extend to Israel and Zionist Jews. The idea and words of a leader cannot be cherry-picked. National Democratic leadership knows that. And while it may not be easy to find an imam who has not muddled their message and media presentations with hatred, they should look harder. It cannot be possible that all Muslim clergy have an anti-Israel, anti-Jewish bent. But if Democrats hope to regain any moral footing, they must not invite guests to their house who espouse violence or hatred. On another subject, we do not spend enough time celebrating the miracle of Israel. Creating the State of Israel was no small feat for the Jewish people. For 71 years, Israel has transformed the world. Not just the Jewish world, the whole world, the entire world. The world is a better place because Israel exists. The years have not passed smoothly. The first few years after Israel was established, it was not at all certain that this small country surrounded by enemies at war with its neighbors would survive. But miracles do happen. The first miracle was the creation of the state. And the miracle number 2 was its initial survival, its victory against all odds in the first few years. Every year on the eve of Israel's anniversary, the country's population numbers are released. The numbers are humbling given the Jewish state's short history and the realization that just a few years ago, Jews suffered a Holocaust. Not only did Israel survive, it thrived. The creation of the State of Israel was one of the greatest, most drastic, most dramatic distinctions in history. Within a period of 15 years, from 1941 to 1956, Jews went from horror to rebirth to builders. Horror, rebirth, builders. Today, Israel is home to over 9 million citizens. Today, the total population of Israel is 9,021,000. That's the official number given by the annual report released by Israel's Central Bureau of Statistics. The report divides the population into different demographics. Of the total population, 6,697,000 are Jews. That's 74.2%. 1,890,000 are Arabs. That's 20.9%. And 434,000 belong to other religions, 4.8%. The creation of Israel and its continued strength and success illustrate important points in history. The destiny of the Jewish people is not victimhood, but creativity and productive contributions. The sciences, the humanities, and the arts have all been beneficiaries of Israel's magnificence. Despite the horrors of the Holocaust, Israel emerged as the fulfillment of the age-old dream of building the Promised Land, the place often called the Holy Land. Being connected to the land of Israel is transformative. That connection is called Zionism. It is Zionism that moved Jews from thinking and living and surviving as individuals to thinking and living and surviving as Jews, as a community, as a state. There is a stark contrast in Jewish life between pre- and post-1948, the year Israel was established. For those who see God's hand in the reestablishment of a Jewish state in its ancestral homeland, the land of Abraham and his son Isaac, of David and his son Solomon, the state of Israel means a great deal more than simply a government that collects taxes and collects garbage. For those around the world who see God's hand in all that exists, the modern state of Israel is proof that God is active in the world. This is true for Jews and for non-Jews, true for lovers of Israel and for lovers of democracy. The devoutly secular and those who campaign for freedom and democracy have gained from Israel's creation and its continued existence. Israelis are leaders in almost every field. Think technology, hacking, medicine, biology, biotech, economics, art, poetry, film, theater, food, wine, fashion, academia, and continue. And you will find Israelis on the cutting edge. Israel, just a little larger than Papua New Guinea and a little smaller than Switzerland and Austria, has accomplished so much and is on track to accomplish so much more. And that's the third miracle, miracle number 3. And Israel is the only real democracy in the Middle East. Never take the miracle of Israel for granted. The miracle continues every single day, year in and year out. Coming up next, points of view. Here's what some important voices have been talking about. First up is an editorial from the New York Times. It was published online on May 1st, 2019, and in the print edition on May 3rd. The editorial is entitled Islamic State, Landless but Still Dangerous. And in a short description, the group's leaders, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, re-emerges in a video warning that while the caliphate may be gone, the jihad continues. The online piece then actually has a byline. Byline means written by. It reads by the editorial board. And then following that is an explanation that many of you should know well, as you are regular watchers of this television show. The website explains that an editorial is and what the editorial board is. The editorial board, and this is the quote, the editorial board represents the opinions of the board, its editor, and the publisher. It is separate from the newsroom and the op-ed section, unquote. Finally, the editorial begins. The 18-minute video clip had all the jihadist cliches. The terrorist leader sitting cross-legged on a flowered mattress in an anonymous room, his full beard dyed with henna, a faux military fishing vest over his black robe, and a custom AK-47 at his side, with lieutenants nearby, faces obscured. Osama bin Laden had used the same props, as had Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, the first leader of the Islamic State, or ISIS. The image was the message. The leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, wanted his far-flung followers to know that he was still alive and in command, and that the ISIS terror network was functioning despite the loss of the broad caliphate it once viciously controlled across Iraq and Syria. And despite the $25 million bounty on his head, the terror war against the Crusaders was far from over. Quote, he says, "Our battle today is a battle of attrition," Mr. al-Baghdadi intoned in a low voice, "and we will prolong it for the enemy, and they must know that the jihad will continue until Judgment Day." Now comes the zinger, and the New York Times is so correct in pointing this out, and listen very carefully. The New York Times says, "The tedious familiarity of the scene and the apocalyptic talk, however, made them no less menacing. Mr. al-Baghdadi apparently made the video sometime after ISIS was driven out of its last sliver of territory, the village of Baghouz in Syria, on March 23rd. But the organization had been declared dead before, only to come back with a vengeance. And indeed, a week before the video was made public, suicide bombers allied with ISIS struck in churches and high-end hotels across Sri Lanka, killing at least 253. An audio message appended to the clip declared that this was, quote, vengeance for their brothers in Baghouz, unquote. The New York Times now describes Baghdadi and ISIS. The editorial continues, Mr. al-Baghdadi had last appeared in a video 5 years earlier when he mounted the pulpit of the Al-Nuri Mosque in Mosul, Iraq, to proclaim a caliphate, an Islamic State, with himself as the caliph. His trademark was extraordinary cruelty, even by the depraved standards of earlier jihadists, with prisoners publicly beheaded, captive women raped, and suicide bombers dispatched on hundreds of missions. Now the New York Times pushes us to be strong and fight ISIS. They continue by writing, "The counterinsurgency campaign remains critical, but alone it will not be enough to uproot ISIS or its offshoots. As Fawaz Gerges, the author of ISIS: A History, has argued, the Islamist terrorism feeds on a deep sense of outrage and injustice that flourishes in the broken politics of the Arab and Islamic world, the clash of Sunni-dominated Saudi Arabia and the Shiite majority Iran, and the intervention of outside powers like the United States, Russia, and Turkey." The editorial board concludes that the bigger issues in the Arabic world are what caused ISIS to emerge, and opines that there needs to be a strategy to solve the bigger issues in order to eradicate ISIS. This is how they conclude. A long-term strategy must include seeking an end to those rivalries, tensions, and conflicts. So long as they continue to boil, Mr. al-Baghdadi, or whatever preening jihadist succeeds him, will be back. Second up is a column from the New York Post, and it's by Jonathan Tobin, a regular columnist there. The piece was published on May 22nd, 2019. The column is entitled, Herman Wouk, the novelist who spoke for post-war America. The piece is a real tribute to Herman Wouk, and at the same time a critique of the literati. Wouk was a giant, the best-selling author, but he was not part of the literati. He loved tradition, patriotism, religion, Judaism. He was not part of the literati scene. I met Herman Wouk several times. When I was a young undergraduate, he was so open to me, so receptive, so helpful. He was extremely impressive. Tobin illustrates how successful Wouk was. Here is how the column begins. Herman Wouk was not beloved by our city's literary establishment. The writer, who died last week, 10 days short of his 104th birthday, was pretty much the opposite of novelists who won the praise of our elites. While the likes of Norman Mailer, Philip Roth, challenged everything about post-World War II America, including its faith, morals, and patriotic pieties, Wouk honored those same qualities. That's why his best-selling books that endorsed conventional middle-class existence and celebrated the old-fashioned patriotism of religion didn't inspire the same kind of respect given to those writers whose purpose was to expose what they considered to be the hypocrisy and shallow nature of the kind of life to which most Americans aspired. But 60 years after books like K Mutiny and Marjorie Morningstar and many others that followed made Wouk a fixture on the bestseller list. That's exactly why we should be celebrating his legacy. Tobin encapsulates Wouk's great strengths. He was able to speak to the masses and connect with them. Tobin writes, while more fashionable authors derided service to our nation as exploitative or morally unserious, Wouk thought differently. He cheered the patriotism of his main characters rather than mocking it. Tobin now addresses Wouk's Judaism. Wouk was a proud Jew. Wouk was a Jewish Jew. He treated religion the same way. Whereas faith was largely banished from popular culture for decades, Wouk, an Orthodox Jew, not only treated it with respect, but as essential to a moral life. His book, This Is My God, helped introduce Judaism to many Americans who knew nothing of it and gave secular Jews a primer in their own faith. And now Tobin concludes, Wouk traveled far from his humble Bronx beginnings and continued writing until the end. In that sense, he was not only the quintessential upward-striving New Yorker, but also one who never forgot or ceased to celebrate the values bequeathed to him by his city and his community. As we look back now on his remarkable century, a more sober assessment of his place in our literary history would reveal that while he was no Tolstoy, his stories are essentially all of our stories. New York should remember and salute him for that achievement. Herman Wouk, may he rest in peace. Tihei Nishmato Baruch. Coming up, commentary through cartoons, where pictures tell the story. Let's discuss 3 cartoons today. The first was published on May 5th, 2019. It was drawn by Eren van Dam and is entitled USA and Iran. It is a play on the now famous New York Times cartoon, which we will discuss in another show. 2 dogs with human heads are fighting with sabers. Each is wearing a hat. The Persian-hatted dog represents Iran, and the other represents Saudi Arabia. The Saudi dog is attached to a harness and is leading a blind Trump. Not very funny, but it is interesting, especially because of where it came from. Next up is from Pakistan, even more interesting, and drawn by Sabir Nazar. It was published on May 16th, 2019. We see a boxing ring for the championship of the Middle East. A huge, muscular U.S. fighter is in the ring. His manager is the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council. Just say the Gulf states. Also in the ring is a tiny, scrawny, but defiant Iran with his hands on his hips. This cartoon depicts a stark reality. And remember, this cartoon comes from the Pakistani press. Last up is a cartoon by Yaakov Kirshen, Dry Bones. It was published on May 19th, 2019, and it is entitled War with Iran, 2 questions. A nameless leader asks 2 questions. 1, are the crazed Iranian Ayatollahs and their regional proxies ready for all-out war? Question number 2, are we? In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. Superbugs are endangering the Middle East. A superbug is a type of bacteria that is resistant to antibiotics. Superbugs are the result of the overuse of antibiotics in society. Iraq and Egypt seem to have the worst case of superbugs, but they are popping up elsewhere in almost every part of the Middle East. As far as we can see, these areas have not controlled their use of antibiotics. Some have said that in parts of the Middle East, antibiotics are distributed like candy. And what is worse is that these societies also give antibiotics freely to their livestock. Because of overexposure and overuse of the medicine and antibiotics, the antibiotics are simply not effective against these superbugs. The medicine is simply not stopping the bacteria. This problem has endangered the public health of the entire region. Unfortunately, there is nothing to do to change the situation. Stronger antibiotics would work, but only if their use was limited and only prescribed in extreme situations. Russia and China are moving to encroach on the U.S. in terms of arms markets in the Middle East. The United States has always dominated the Middle East arms market, and now that is changing. Both Russia and China are pitching to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates and Qatar. To get a sense of just how lucrative and enormous this market is, in 2018, Saudi Arabia bought $7.7 billion in weapons from the U.S. The U.S. is losing market share in the Middle East. Russia and China are all too aware of that fact. The U.S. is no longer the most influential force in the region. China and Russia are laughing, as the saying goes, all the way to the bank. At least 70 Iranians have died in flash floods over these past few weeks. The devastation has caused thousands of people to be relocated. The numbers say everything. 1,900 cities have been flooded. 140 rivers have burst their banks. 409 landslides. 78 roads destroyed. 84 bridges failed. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo issued a statement. Quote, "These floods once again show the level of Iranian regime mismanagement in urban planning and in emergency preparedness. The regime blames outside entities when in fact it is their mismanagement that has led to this disaster. The United States stands ready to assist and to contribute to the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, which would then direct the money through the Iranian Red Crescent for relief," unquote. Pompeo is correct. Iranians are suffering, and their leadership is standing idly by and letting it happen. Iran flew its first totally local, manufactured fighter jet. I watched the videos, and it showed nothing exceptional, except that it was Iranian. The jet is called the Kausar, or Thunderbolt in Persian. It's also the name of a section in the Quran itself. The Kausar is based on the US-made Northrop F-5. Iran claims that their jet is a fourth generation in its technology and that it's capable of jamming all electronic attacks while flying. It was said that Iran manufactured at least 5 Kausar jets. They claim 7, but I saw in a picture 5 of them in a factory in a huge hangar. Iran is now ready not simply to test, but also to sell them. The question now is how well this Iranian-made jet stands up against the best US and Russian fighter jets and computer technology. The pressure is mounting. The United States has canceled all 8 waivers that permitted certain countries to import oil and other products from Iran. Now, President Trump has announced that anyone importing anything, especially oil from Iran, will be sanctioned by the United States. President Trump is giving the allies a choice. Do business with Iran or do business with the United States? It is a simple choice. You can't do both. Iran is responding. Iranian leadership has announced that they will close the Straits of Hormuz if they are not permitted to export their oil. This is a game of rhetoric and power. Who knows what will happen next? Iran is responding to the U.S. threats by issuing their own threats to close the Straits of Hormuz, through which 20 to 30% of the world's oil travels every single day. They're also threatening Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. Iran is saying, you think you can replace us and promise Donald Trump that you will fill the supply gap of oil? Don't count on it. According to Iran's President Rouhani, quote, "You whose existence is in the shadow of the Islamic Republic of Iran, how can you tell Trump that if you bring Iran's oil exports to zero, we will make up for it? Do you understand the consequences of this statement and that it means that you are a definite enemy of the Iranian people?" Unquote. Rouhani went on to say that if the United States wants to negotiate, all sanctions need to be lifted, an apology must be issued, referring to the prisoner exchange. This is Rouhani's phraseology. Negotiation is only possible if all pressures are lifted, they apologize for their illegal actions, and there is mutual respect, unquote. The Grand Ayatollah Khamenei has also chimed in. The supreme leader of Iran said, and I'm quoting here, America's efforts in sanctioning the sale of Iranian oil won't get anywhere. We can export as much of our oil as we need and want, unquote. This is very serious. The world oil market will feel the effects of this standoff. Oil is now at the highest price since November, and the battle of oil is on. The world market has begun, and Iran is not forfeiting. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. Did you know that the GCC stands for the Gulf Cooperation Council? When it was created, the GCC was composed of 6 Gulf states: Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. Established in 1981, the purpose of the GCC was to unify, strengthen themselves against Iran. In 2014, the GCC threw out Qatar because Qatar chose to embrace and reach out to Iran and defend them internationally. Qatar leaned to Iran instead of to Saudi Arabia. They have never been reinstated into the GCC. Internal tensions in the Gulf and in Islam continue to center around the Shiite-Sunni rift. There is nothing that can be done to mollify that rift. One side sees the other as a misbeliever. A non-believer would be better than a misbeliever. A misbeliever holds the wrong beliefs. It means they changed fundamental principles. They are kifra in Arabic, which is a kofar in Hebrew, someone who denies a basic tenet of Islam. These rifts are deep. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.